Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is from the incredible mind of Kessel, the Viking, from over on Reddit No Sleep. And as ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. Well, it really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story. And title: If you drive to Texas, don't do it at night. Let's get straight into that. A week or so ago, I was driving down to Texas. It was a long drive, one that would take 2 days unless I drove non-stop throughout the night. However, I was eager to reach my destination, and I chose to tough it out for the sake of getting there sooner. The drive started out relatively normal. I drove for a couple of hours south, and I felt good. I had my music cranked and a cooler full of energy drinks in the passenger seat, when I saw a sign saying, "Now entering Tennessee." I thought that I was making record time. I must have forgotten to watch the clock though, because the sun began to set. I was partially confused, mainly due to the fact that I had left earlier in the day. But I disregarded it as the idle distractions I created for myself to pass the time faster, being the cause. Something else odd I noticed was the open freeway. Normally, I would expect to see many vehicles all traveling to different places, but instead, I seemed to be the only one out and about. Still, I wasn't feeling tired and had already committed to driving straight through the night, even if things seemed strange. But as I drove on, I realized that the sun had set far too quickly, and with a lack of vehicles on the road, it looked like I was driving in a void. The blackened world around me was only illuminated by my high beams, but I could only see perhaps 15 feet ahead of me. There were a few normalities like guardrails and mile markers, but if something were to appear in front of me, I'd likely hit it because of the lack of visibility, and so I pulled over. My vehicle came to a subtle halt on the side of the freeway, and I turned on my emergency lights. Realistically, I knew it wasn't a fog. It was just dark, darker than the world behind my eyelids. I suppose I wanted to see another car pass before I concluded that something had gone wrong, but none came. I waited for more than 20 minutes, and not one car or truck barreled down the freeway. I decided to roll my window down and allow some fresh air into my car. Plus, I was slightly panicking because I did have somewhere to be, and this was taking up precious time. And suddenly, the engine shut off. Even the accessory power had gone cold. I performed some percussive maintenance by smacking my hand against the dash as if it would magically fix everything, but obviously it didn't. Then I heard a quiet ticking sound. You know the sound your fingers make when you tap them against a table? Well, it was like that, but instead of the soft fleshy contact you get from the skin of your digits, it was more like the clicking of nails against plastic. My intuition told me that it was coming from under the hood, and therefore I'd have to step outside. But just as I was about to open the door, I almost had a heart attack, because hanging over the trim of the window sill was a hand. I freaked out and flung myself into the passenger seat on top of my cooler. The hand was tapping its pale white fingers against the inner part of my door, and after my initial fear died down, I thought that it may be someone looking to help me, but I did have my 4 ways on. Part of me knew full well that another vehicle hadn't pulled up behind mine while I was distracted by the engine malfunction, but I still inquired. "Hello? Who's there?" The fingers stopped moving and the hand slipped down slowly over the side of the door and out of sight. I waited while trying to catch my breath before asking again. "Hey, who's there? Why are you messing with me?" No sound, not even crickets responded to me. I turned my head to peer out of the rear window and couldn't see anything, which made me wonder more as to who was outside of my car. My ear was pressed against the passenger window, and just as I was about to slide back into the driver's seat, I heard the tapping a second time. right next to my ear. I nearly got whiplash from the speed at which I turned my head to look out of the window, when there wasn't anything there, in terms of a tap in hand. However, there were fingerprints left in the condensation on the outside of the glass. My heart raced and I crawled back into the driver's seat and tried to stupidly roll the window up, even though I quickly realized that that was futile. Then I started to hear footsteps in the gravel on the side of the asphalt. But when I looked in my mirrors, I saw nothing. That was until my headlights came on, without warning. They flashed brightly ahead of me and illuminated the figure of a human standing directly in the light. But I couldn't see who it was because they were missing the head. The headless torso held out its thumb as if it were a hitchhiker. However, it only did so for a moment before beginning to approach my vehicle. I tried to start the engine, but for some reason, my key wouldn't crank. And then I thought, well, if the headlights are on, then surely I should be able to at least roll the window up. I moved slowly, the body that is, towards me with a shambling, unstable gait. Unfortunately for me, my window wouldn't go up, even when fiddling with the key in the ignition. I started to panic and sweat began forming on the palms of my hands. And by the time it was at the front corner of the driver's side, I decided I would get out and confront it. As I reached for the door handle and pulled, I found that it wouldn't open. I have one of those stupid pull-up locks that sink into the door, and so I wasn't able to grip it and force it up. The electronic unlock didn't work either, and so my only option was to climb out of the window. The problem was, it had already reached my side mirror. Well, there was no way I'd be able to crawl through the window without that thing grabbing me, and so, once again, I slid into the passenger seat, with my feet poised to kick at it if it tried to worm its unnatural way inside. From there, I could see it was a masculine body. It was exceedingly tall, and it wore a grey sweatshirt laden with holes. It had scuffed pants with tread marks denoting a tire had crossed over them at ludicrous speed. If I had to guess, I'd say that they had been run over. And as it tried to reach its arm inside, I kicked it away. It didn't appear to have much more than primal instinct, because it stumbled back and took some time to regain itself. Still, regardless of the fact that it was a brainless walking corpse, I was still terrified. And when it reached inside the second time, I scooted myself towards the driver's seat and forcibly jammed my foot against its chest, sending it falling to the ground. I used the opportunity to get out of the car via the open window and run around to the trunk. I couldn't open it without the key, which I had stupidly left inside, but at least I could get away. But as it rose to its feet, I felt an immense pressure in my head, as if someone was squeezing my brain. My vision became blurry, and different parts of my body burned with a fiery intensity. Every time I tried to move one of my limbs, I couldn't, and the paralysis weaving its way throughout my body made me an easy target. The headless torso continued shuffling its disjointed feet in my direction with an outstretched hand, but the other was held low and with its thumb out. And suddenly, my faculties snapped back into my control, and I was able to avoid its mindless descent by stepping to the other side of my vehicle. I don't know what made me think the car would start if I tried again, but despite my former failures, I awkwardly jumped inside and turned the key. My eyes widened with joy when the engine turned over, followed by the familiar rumbling of the vehicle running. I threw the shifter into drive and slammed my foot on the gas without hesitation and sped off into the dark. I thought I was clear, and my breathing slowly returned to normal. It was odd that some strange part of me thought that maybe it was just a ghost that was asking for help, but that was highly improbable, and now I know that wasn't the case. The freeway was still obscured by all the encompassing darkness, but I didn't care. I just kept driving. Then my heart skipped a beat, because standing on the side of the road was the headless person. I drove by but couldn't see them in my rearview mirror due to the darkness. I took a breath and drove on without trying to think about it too much, while taking a look at my clock to see what time it was. And it read 0-100 hours. Great, I said aloud, still maintaining a relatively high speed. My hands were firmly gripping the steering wheel, and I kept thinking it over, but I was wrong again. Like before, I saw the body standing adjacent to the freeway with an outstretched thumb. I started walking into the road as if it were trying to be hit. I avoided it and continued on, completely freaked out. I took a peek in my rearview mirror, and I could have sworn it was sitting in my back seat. But as I quickly glanced over my shoulder, it was just an empty seat. My paranoia was somewhat satiated when I saw it again, but now it was holding something in the hand that didn't have its thumb out. As I drove by, I narrowed my eyes to see it closer, and it was holding a smiling head. At this point, I was close to fainting from the fear. I just wanted this horror loop to end, but as that thought crossed my mind, I heard something heavy fall onto the roof of my car. I jumped in my seat, startled by the sound, and looked up. Obviously, I couldn't see anything, but I could hear movement and I could sense the weight lurking above. Regrettably, during all the chaos, I had still forgotten to roll the window up, which I admit was entirely my fault, much to my dismay. And I say that because the sound suddenly stopped and I thought it was over once again. But when I looked to my left, I was met face to face with a severed head. The body was on the roof, holding the head in my open window. I yelled and it tossed the head inside, and it latched onto my thigh, biting deeply into my muscle. It laughed maniacally. I nearly crashed trying to deal with both the head and keeping my vehicle on the road. I yelled out in pain and began pounding my fist against the back of the head. Luckily, one of my attacks dislodged it from my leg. I grabbed onto it with my free hand before throwing it out of the window. All at once, the darkness lifted, and I was able to see the head bouncing down the freeway in my mirror, followed by the body it belonged to sliding off my roof, only to tumble onto the road. I was breathing so hard, I thought I might lose consciousness, as my leg was bleeding pretty badly, but I dared not stop. I started to see other vehicles, and that's when I finally allowed myself to feel any sort of relief. The events I had experienced shocked my system, and I decided I would pull off at the nearest town and get a motel for the rest of the night. When I found one, the lady at the counter said, "Your face is so pale. Are you okay?" I looked deeply into her eyes and said, "There was a man, or rather a body, on the freeway without a head. It terrorized me and nearly killed me." She stared at me for a moment before bursting into laughter. "Ha ha ha! Oh, you young people. You always have the craziest stories. Although I do seem to remember someone else saying something about a body on the freeway once." My eyes lit up. "What did they say? What happened to them?" "Well, nothing happened. We called the police, but they found no bodies, nor did they find any evidence of an accident. And a person ended up leaving the next morning, and, well, that was that." "Huh," I uttered softly. I got a room for the night and addressed my wound. It wasn't as bad as I originally had thought. It must have been the lighting that made it look worse. I stayed up until around early morning, and then checked out with barely any sleep. And now I'm telling you to avoid driving down any freeway if you're going to Texas. I mean, I can't say for sure what the catalyst is, but something to do with my specific trip caused me to experience this horrific anomaly. And I just want to warn everyone I can. Although the lady at the counter did say someone else experienced something similar, I just don't know. And it's better to be safe than sorry. What's even worse is that when I was about to get into my car to continue my drive south, I noticed a fresh handprint pressed firmly against the outside of my driver's window. I guess I'll be sticking to day driving from now on. Nebraska. Let's get straight into that. This took place in the early 1970s Nebraska, in a little bitty town called Dorchester, not too far outside of Lincoln. My mum, abandoned by her first husband, did her best to raise my two older brothers, and my brothers were ages 4 and 7. Times were lean and hard for the little family, and with some help from my grandparents, Mum moved into a shabby old house located in town. The house had some history. It belonged to the railroad, serving as a boarding house for employees and passengers dating back to the 1880s, and it fulfilled that role until it fell into disuse, and it was eventually made into a rental property. Mum noticed strange happenings surrounding the family, starting the day they moved in. Small rows of salt, neatly poured all around the windowsills and across all doorways. The family's pet St. Bernard, named Barney, refused to enter the house. He stayed outside regardless of the weather or the time of the year. And to make matters worse, both my brothers uncharacteristically started wetting their beds. One morning, my brother, aged 4, played in the living room. Yet, he watched a specific section of the wall. And Mum noticed he sometimes talked to a particular part of the wall. And Mum was cleaning the house at the time, and so she had one eye on him and the other on washing dishes, figuring he was just using his imagination and shrugging off his behaviour. Soon she started vacuuming the living room. My brother sat there watching Sesame Street on television. And as she swept, she noticed my brother stand up and walk over to the wall he had talked to earlier. He then put both his hands on the wall, slowly moving them up and down. He continued talking to the area and then broke into tears. And Mum shut off the vacuum and asked what was wrong. She said my brother turned and faced her, his face flushed and wet, and through his tears he sobbed, "Mummy, there is a sad man in the wall. He's crying. He wants out. He is there. Mummy, see him. He is there, Mummy. See him. Can you see him? Help him, Mummy. Please help him." Then Mum quickly snatched up one brother and half dragged the other, and she ran 3 blocks terrified to my grandparents' house. My grandparents finally talked Mum into returning to the home a few days later, a feat that took much convincing, threatening, and reassuring. In the months after that event, a loud crashing bang sound often emitted from the attic. Mum described the sound as an adult taking a bowling ball and slamming it on the ground as hard as possible. A rolling sound soon followed the loud impact. Every time the sound occurred, it was investigated, and nothing was ever found. This happened both day and night. My grandparents both experienced this on many occasions. And when the sound would happen, my grandparents said both my brothers would scream and go into hysterics. And Mum felt terrified and trapped. She was bound into a lease and borrowed heavily from my grandparents to make ends meet. She had nowhere to go with 2 small children and couldn't afford to leave. Months later, my dad came into the picture. He eventually moved into the household. It was a damn creepy house, he said on many occasions. He hated living there the minute he moved in. Dad had returned from Vietnam a few years prior and was a combat veteran. Whenever he was in that house, a feeling of being watched with ill intent plagued him. Many nights for him were filled with terrible nightmares about the war. He had never experienced this before moving into the home. Mum said she would often wake up to find him pacing restlessly in the darkness. Other nights she had awoken by the muffled screams of his tormented sleep. One Sunday evening, the family returned home from a grocery shop. Upon unlocking the front door and entering the home, they found 4 dead blackbirds in the center of the living room. The birds lined up in a parallel row and with their wings spread as if in flight. They each lay on their breasts. Heads and beaks were pointing towards a specific area of the living room wall. And instantly, the atmosphere was pierced by my brother's sharp, shrill screaming cries. My father stood in the entryway. His arms were full of groceries, his mouth gaped open in utter shock by the insanity before him. My mum immediately turned and crouched to console the boys and shield them from the scene, and it happened as she kissed and embraced her boys. A loud bashing sound hammered from the attic above. The windows of the house vibrated from the concussion. Dust slowly drifted down through the last rays of sunlight. And Mum said the utter silence that followed was incredibly unnerving. Then the slow, heavy rolling sound again filled the entire house. My dad set down the bags of groceries and made his way to the attic, cautiously approaching. And Mom continued to hug my brothers. As she happened to look past their shoulders onto the large front porch, and she saw Barney there. The giant St. Bernard lay cowered with his tail slightly pulled under him. The dog was unwilling to make eye contact when she called out to him, and instead the animal shook uncontrollably. As she noticed a large wet spot beneath him, Dad came down from the attic a few minutes later. Nothing was ever found as usual. Well, this was the breaking point for my family. My dad decided to sell his vehicle and worked overtime when possible. He paid off the lease at the first opportunity. He moved them all out of the house and never looked back. My dad said that once they'd left that house, they never had any other experiences like that. His terrible nightmares all but stopped. And I travelled to Nebraska with my dad in 2002, and he showed me the old house, which was abandoned but still standing. And Dad grimly joked, saying as we drove by, "I wonder if that crying man ever made it out of that wall." Wow. Certainly another one. Wow. Short but epically sweet. Couple of stories there from our good friends over on Reddit, No Sleep. Big thank you guys for your input on the show. Really did enjoy your stories and look forward to more of your work in the future. And of course, I really hope you enjoy my rendition. Well, guys and girls as ever, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. Well, it really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. Now, if you're an aspiring author or would just like to get in touch, please do so at the contact email, which is as on screen. contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. As ever, guys and girls, a huge thank you for your kind comments, your likes and shares, and your constant support. I really do appreciate every single one of you, and I'm doing my best to get things back on track. As ever, I hope you're all well and happy, and taking a fight back to life. But above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.